Hello, and welcome to All the Grief, a regular podcast for all those who have been touched by grief. We are your hosts. I am Rebecca Luttrell.
And I am Andrea Mathern. We are two friends, a therapist, and a social scientist, both highly sensitive fellow grievers, here to share our hearts as we talk about all the grief. Good morning, Rebecca.
Good morning.
How is your heart today?
I guess the proper word for a heart feeling would be overwhelmed, but what I feel aware of is just like overcommitment. And I think that where that stems from is I love people and I love my people, and there are too many people. And so I keep making all of these agreements to hang out with people, forgetting that I also have things that I'm trying to do in the world.
Right.
And this week I really overcommitted. And so it's like my heart feels, there's a part where I think, especially doing grief work, it's like, this is the only thing that's important, connection and love. And I want to spend time with the people I love. And then the rest of me is like, well, you have other things to do. So there's just that battle happening.
Yeah. I recognize that. And you do so love your people. We're all so grateful. And we all need to recognize that you have shit to get done. So
I know.
Thank you for sharing. I hope you find the balance soon.
Thank you. Yes. And how is your heart today?
My heart feels really open. You know, yesterday was solstice, to go all hippie. Yesterday was summer solstice, which is like both my favorite day of the year and my least favorite. And so what I love about it is I love the length of the day. It's the longest day of the year and we get all of this wonderful sunshine, and it's the sort of peak of summer, but sort of the idea of the summer season, like it's beginning and we're sort of kicking it off, and it just heightens everything. And so I took a walk with my dog yesterday. It was so cloudless in Denver, and then the clouds rolled in and we got poured on. I mean, just soaking, dripping wet, and it was thundering, and I was with my dog, and it was just the best moment. So my heart just feels super open and prepared. So that's where I am, I feel.
Well, I need to check in because you said it's your favorite and least favorite, and I didn't hear the least favorite
Least
part.
favorite because now the days get shorter starting today.
Okay.
Yes, so that's the only part of it that's like bitter for me. So now they're shorter. Well, I'm really excited. We have on an author, Jessica Waite, and we have an advanced copy, which I think makes Rebecca and I feel very professional and special, of her new book, The Widow's Guide to Dead Bastards, a memoir. Jessica never realized that she was a latchkey kid because she lived so close to her small town library. She's such a library fiend. I love it. Now she actually leads people to heal through writing, and she mentors incarcerated writers through the Hero's Journey Prison Writing Project. She's an award-winning essayist who lives in Calgary, which I learned to pronounce through her book, Alberta, Canada, on Treaty 7 territory in the foothills of the Canadian Rockies. You can find her work at jessicawaite.work, which we will link in the show notes. And we are so excited to welcome Jessica to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I am delighted to be here. Really overjoyed.
Well, Jessica, as we do ask, how is your heart today?
Yeah, it's bursting with joy being here and hearing your check-ins. I was reminded about why the winter solstice is also my favorite and least favorite day. So paralleling with you, and and then also resonating with Rebecca because I have a teenage son who just graduated from high school. His last exam is coming up very soon, and then he is hitting the road on a giant cycling adventure. And so I'm dropping him off in just a few days. so the busyness and then the suddenly like strange emptiness feeling is coming upon me. So my heart's full of all kinds of emotions. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, all of that makes so much sense. Thank you so much. And have a fun ride, Dash. That sounds so incredible.
I know. I feel like we've watched Dash grow up just in reading the book, and now to know he's graduating from high school. Oh my gosh, that's wild.
I know. I have to, not to start at the end, but sometimes I do this. When I'm reading a book, sometimes I just need to know how to prepare my heart And so sometimes I read the end. I'm sorry, every author out there, everybody who's ever made a movie, I will likely go look for spoilers because I need to know, like, do I need to prepare for a broken heart? Do I need to prepare for joy? And I didn't do that with yours. I was very tempted. But what I did love was in the epilogue, you gave an update of how everyone, including the dogs were in the book. And I did really relish in that. So I love that. So anyone reading, you'll get the down low on how everyone is post this book's ending. But Jessica, tell us, why did you write this book?
Okay, so you said the title is The Widow's Guide to Dead Bastards. That was not the original title. I want to say up front that my late husband Sean was somebody who I held in extremely high regard in life, and I really loved him and think that we loved each other. But he died suddenly in November of 2015 of a heart attack. And subsequent to his death, I found out that he was hiding some really big secrets from me. And things that were really hard to manage and process, and so that's where the that's where the sort of angry sounding part of the title comes from. And I wrote this book kind of for two reasons. One, I felt compelled to do it after the act of like journaling and writing was so cathartic. But I felt like I learned a lot through the process of sense making the events of the story. And so I hoped that even though the way that things kind of stacked up for me, I hope is not super typical for everyone, the individual components of the story, I think everyone's had a heartbreak. Everyone feels grief. Not everyone maybe, but lots of people feel some sort of connection with someone who has died and are wondering about signs and synchronicities. And because that's sort of, where the story goes, is that even though Sean has died, a bunch of weird things start happening that didn't used to happen. And I'm like, what is going on? And is he trying to like make amends from beyond? I don't know. And that's not really in my belief system. And what am I going to do with all of this? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and you feel that journey through the book. One of the first reflections I wanted to offer was you were so vulnerable with everything that you uncovered with Sean's betrayal, honestly, was you could have ridden this wave of the graceful, wronged widow. You could have not shared with readers the dark side of betrayal trauma, and you didn't. And there were times when it was like, I was your friends who were like, don't send that text message, don't call. I was sitting there with the book in my hands, like, don't do it, Jess. Don't do it, Jess. But you did. You just put it all on the table for us. And what I was thinking as I was reading it was like, what a beautiful gift for anyone who's experienced betrayal to feel normalized in your honesty.
Yeah. Yeah. I really, yeah. My most shameful moments are definitely included as part of the story. And it was hard to muscle up the courage to be able to put that out there for people to see. But as I've had, like, just, showing it to the odd, like, very trusted friend at the beginning, those were some of people's favorite parts. Like, the parts that I was like the most ashamed of, the most worried about, where I felt like I behaved poorly or in a way that I wouldn't want to admit. That's the thing with shame, right? Like it's like the things that we're trying to hide away, when we bring light to them, there's there's a transformation that happens. And
Yeah.
Well, and as someone who has been betrayed and had those fantasy thoughts about like, I'm gonna write her a text. I was like, yes. Like I wasn't thinking don't do it. I was like, do it for all of us. And I feel like the arc of it and sort of where you came to and what you realized in it, this question that's always floating out there, like, would it make a difference? Should I do it? And then to sort of see, like, it doesn't matter if you do it or you don't do it, because it really comes to what peace you can bring to yourself in the face of like someone doing something really awful.
yeah, and like what we're talking about right now is sort of like a revenge storyline. And yeah, I really battled with myself about, whether to do it. But I had so much anger and so much shame. And I understood at some level, like, not all of this is mine. Needed to do something to like tip the balance back, or at least like, assign some responsibility elsewhere for things that I was dealing with that shouldn't have been mine in the first place. So I do think, revenge isn't the be all end all, but I don't know if I could have got to that place of coming to more peace later if I hadn't done something to get my anger
Oh,
outside. And yeah.
absolutely. And I think, one universal lesson we keep hearing over and over as we talk to different folks about grief is that our path is our path, and the things that we do are the best thing that we can do in that moment. And whether or not that would be the right thing for Rebecca in her moment or whatever, it was yours. And I'm so grateful that you felt so willing and called to share that entirety of that particular storyline because it was so human. It was so human. And it was such another side of grief because it was like, I think maybe in the book you call it layered grief. Or maybe I'm making that up. But, it was like the sudden grief of your husband, this person that you loved and adored, but then the grief of the person that you loved and adored,
Yeah, yeah, and them not being who I
Right.
thought. Because one of the things that had made our relationship feel special, and we were together for 20 years,
Yeah.
was that it felt like we were such good teammates,
Mm-hmm.
and that we really built each other up, and that the life that we had, we had amazing friendships and a close-knit family. And Sean had a lot of professional success, and I had saying sacrifice my career is maybe overstating, but anyway, I had done a lot to help support that, and it like was all of that for nothing, and was I just completely used and
Mm.
duped, and that's what it felt like.
Mm-hmm.
All of that time was a waste, that it was all a lie. When you're betrayed, I think, at least I'll speak for myself, one of the hardest things is, and one of the things that I grieved the most was a loss of my ability to
Oh,
trust myself,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm like, I was so, how could I have been so foolish? And so that, yeah, that was definitely one of the layers. And then the other one was sort of like a barrier that I put up to try to protect Sean's reputation with all of those people who loved him. And I knew, as they would come and offer these words that should have been comforting, to say, like, you and Dash were his whole
mm.
world, he loved you so much. And I'm sitting, yeah, but
Mm-hmm.
really, I'm like, no, you don't know. And I felt like I couldn't tell them. And so that was such a complicating layer as well.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that struck me as I was reading, and maybe a question that I had even, was it's so revelatory of what was happening for him. And I imagine, just in getting to know you through reading the book, that that was a big decision to say, I'm actually going to go public with this information that he was hiding in shame,
Mm.
and that it feels incomplete to tell you you were his whole world, and then not feel like that's not the full story of what was happening
Yeah,
here. But how did that
yeah.
Mm.
happen? And did you have to ask permission from his family?
Mm.
Like, what were things that
I
were.
didn't ask permission from the family, but what I did was, so as I realized that I was writing something that I might want to someday publish, like, it took a long time to write the book. I spent 7 years
Yeah.
writing it. So over that time, things are changing, and
Mm-hmm.
Dash is growing up, and so we're able to have some kinds of conversations. And then just with the other family members who I was able to stay
Mm.
close with, they were so supportive, and they supported me all the way through the writing of the book. And so gradually we were able to have some hard conversations and become more honest. And so there was one, like, key person who I gave complete veto power to. I'm like, anything you don't want me to say, I won't say. Anything you want me to change, I will change it. And there was only one, but they were like, no, it's great, like,
Mm.
full steam ahead, like,
Mm.
we're very proud of you. But the book had a different title at that time. And so what
Mm.
happened was, everything from getting an agent to getting the book sold happened very quickly. So I got an agent. The agent said, I think we need a different title. This title was a joking title
Sure.
suggested by one of Sean's best
Right.
friends. And I'm like, do I have the guts to put this on the front of the book? Like, could I live with it? So I talked to my son. He was like, yeah, it's okay.
Yeah.
He knows that there's love. He understands. So he's like, go for it. So I did. But then it sold. And so then I had to come back to the family and say, this is being published and this is the title. And
Mm.
that was a really hard pill to swallow. And so it's still kind of rippling out, because, it was my decision to go public, and my decision to share this story, and not
Mm-hmm.
theirs, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm certain that some unwanted attention is going to come, just in terms
Sure.
of things that they might not have wanted to be public. And so I'm sorry for that kind of
Mm-hmm.
collateral damage. But at the same time, what I've heard from the family over and over is, it's your story
Mm.
and you can tell it. And so I just, I think that there's so much healing in that. And I think that the stakes of not telling it, like, I think we hear this over and over, but it's like the stakes for me of holding that in are a life of isolation, loneliness, bitterness, and resentment. And I just couldn't choose that.
Yeah.
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 And so
It feels too like a piece is for Dash. Like this is a legacy we're breaking of people keeping secrets, of things living in shadow and shame, what might have been different if your dad could have said what was happening.
yeah, Rebecca, thanks for bringing that in, because there was this just such a uncanny echo, of my own childhood rippling through, and secrets that were kept, and the fact that I had sort of lost my dad at a similar age to when, even though he didn't die until later, but my parents' marriage broke up, I didn't see my dad anymore, and then anyway, I don't want to go down the giant rabbit hole with it, but it does feel like there's intergenerational trauma at
Oh,
play, and that acting in
Yes.
a different way and being more open breaks that cycle. And so that, again, that's what has given me a lot of courage and confidence to share, even though it's not easy, right? So, but I'm doing it for that reason, because it feels healing for my son, and it feels like there are lots of other people, in this situation, didn't have the time and space to write a book, but that could resonate with this story, or find
Yeah.
something in their own life that's relevant.
That's so beautiful. And it tracks back to what you were saying about sort of the moments where maybe you were not acting in your best self in the book, but that by bringing them to light, the sort of shame of them washes off. Like they're out there and we all have the worst parts of ourselves, right? And so in breaking that cycle, it is breaking the stigma of shame. And I think what's so beautiful in the arc of this book, and I could understand from the family's perspective how the title doesn't necessarily illustrate the full arc of the story. The description on the back certainly does, but you come to a place of having gotten yourself to a more whole self, not completely so whole, but through the sort of like processing and acknowledging of this, that you heal in a way. And there's love on the other side. And I think that's so beautiful. And I think what it offers folks and what it offers that sort of intergenerational trauma is that in facing our darkest histories and pasts and secrets, and bringing them to light, it actually brings us together in the fullness of our humanity. And I just think that is such a beautiful offering.
Thanks. Yeah, that's so well said.
So, on that, even if you haven't experienced this level of betrayal or trauma, felt like a righteous anger. I felt like you got to be angry. I felt that way.
Yes.
It just felt like, oh my gosh, 20 years. And I know it's quite the path, and the book takes us through the whole thing. But how did you move? Or how are you still? I'm sure some days moving from that righteous anger to this place of, there were moments in the empathy where I was like, wow, her heart is huge.
Thank you. So I'm so glad you asked about this, because the anger is a part that I think about a lot. That things do come up once in a while, but mostly I'm so grateful to my anger, because it kept me moving. It was so powerful, and it allowed me to do, in hindsight, I got rid of all Sean's belongings out of our bedroom like the day after I found
Sure.
started
Yeah.
finding out these secrets, whereas it could have taken years to go through, and just so much pain to just like separate from the physical objects that are left behind. But I'm like, nope, done, easy. And being able to keep moving with some of that was, in hindsight, a blessing. But what I started to realize was, to my view, it was very clear cut who was right and wrong. And that was great at first, because I felt so righteous in my anger, and was able to express it. But over time, there was no one coming to like congratulate me for being so right and condemn him for being so wrong.
Mm.
It ends up being a bit of a loop. And it's not
Yeah.
a very clean, that moral outrage kind of feeling. There's residue to that. And so that's when I was talking about like bitterness and emptiness and that sort of thing. Like it was more like a drug that wasn't fueling me anymore, that was actually just keeping me trapped in a kind of dead end cycle. And so I just understood that it wasn't serving me, and I had to do something. I think that might have been part of why I did the revenge plan. It was just like to try and move it out. And then over time, The other thing of how I think that I was able to come into empathy was doing some things that I wasn't proud of and seeing, look at how I've told a lie. Look at how I have, do you know, like things that Sean was doing as a human being that isn't perfect. And look at how imperfect I am. And so just kind of realizing, that we are all human beings doing the best that we can. So yeah. I also want to say for people, because this is like makes it sound like it was a simple process, and it's not that simple.
Yeah.
I don't think that anyone has to forgive or anyone, do you know what I mean? This is not like a moral mandate that somebody has to do something. But I do think for myself, when I noticed that I was being consumed by anger, that maybe the anger itself gave me the energy to change. Like something had to change, and that fueled me to look in a different direction.
Yeah, anger is motivating. Anger has energy. Anger has fire. And so I appreciate the ways that you're speaking of it, like moving you forward. And I think that when we're betrayed, we have every right to be angry. And I love your self reflection of noticing like it's costing me something, and how much longer do I want to keep fueling this fire? And it reminds me of a lot of different stories I've read on forgiveness. And I don't know if you've read the book of forgiveness, Desmond Tutu and Mfo Tutu. And I love the prayer before the prayer in the beginning where they say, give me the will to want to forgive, to just acknowledge forgiveness feels sometimes like letting someone off the hook.
Yes.
And it's like, there's nothing in me that wants to do that. It's not actually what forgiveness is.
Yeah.
So that's why I would never tell anyone to go forgive.
No, but the funny thing is, for myself, I didn't really need that prayer as much because I had the will to forgive. I knew that forgiving was liberating, like from other things in my life that had happened. And so I really wanted to. I just couldn't make myself. And so every time I try and do it and fail and try again and fail. So I was getting angry just at the inability to get out of the loop.
Right.
And so that was something I learned, is like, you can't like strong arm yourself into forgiving.
Completely. Yeah.
I had a couple of reflections on that as well. One, just the beauty of recognizing, I think oftentimes there is this idea that there are like good feelings and bad feelings. And anger oftentimes falls on like the bad feelings. And I'm like, there's just feelings. We just have feelings, and they all have their places. And so I love you contextualizing how anger motivated you, and then it had its time, and then it needed to move to something else. And so I just appreciate that, because I think we are in such a black and white world. We're in such a good vibes only environment. And these are the reality of the human experience, that of course you are going to feel devastation and anger and confusion and all of these things. And yeah, I just love that it supported you in taking steps, necessary steps forward. The other one was thinking about forgiveness. And to me, reading the book, by the time I got to the end, it was something beyond forgiveness. It was like a reconciliation. It was like a reconciliation of the Sean you knew with the Sean he was, which was also the Sean you knew. You know, it was a reconciliation of the love he had for you being real, and the betrayal of that love and commitment, like all of that being so true. So by the time I got to the end, I was like, it felt to me just like this full reconciliation and a full embrace of this human. And I'm gonna cry. I totally lost it at the very end when, you said something to the effect of like, you basically said to Sean, like, when you come, I will follow you into the dark. And it just was like, oh my gosh, I totally lost it, because to me, it was a reconciliation. It was that full embrace of the whole human that he was, and that his fear and shame the whole time was that you wouldn't love him inclusive of these faults and this darkness. And it was your acceptance of, I love all of you. It was just, it was beyond forgiveness to me. It was so beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, that's in the acknowledgement section. So
okay.
Yeah, so to me, like the question at the heart of this story is, can relationships heal beyond the veil of death? And so that was what I was really grappling with the whole time. And, it did take that, like, coming to the understanding that I was trying to cherry pick, to bring back the public facing Sean that he would let me see, so that one that I loved and didn't love the other parts of him, that somehow through cleaning up the mess that was left behind, I was able to, understand and have empathy for those other parts and find that love, and that opened up a whole other channel of, for me, being in relationship with the loved ones that we have that have died, and understanding that how much they are still in our lives, whether, and I think regardless of what you believe happens when we die, it can be through memory, it can be,
Mm.
through objects, it can be through rituals and celebrations when you remember their birthday, or like some little
Mhm.
a song that comes on that you love. And so we are always still in relationship with our dead, I think. And like I had always believed before, I guess just from a kind of rational materialist worldview, if someone died and the relationship wasn't in a good place, it was kind of frozen in time. It's like, well,
Mm.
I guess some things just are left unsaid, and that's how it is. And that felt not the best.
Mhm.
And so in this case, it just gave me so much more of a feeling of like possibility and agency, and yeah, the ability to kind of heal in a way that I wouldn't have thought was possible before.
Definitely. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I want to go back to a thought that was happening in the book as you were talking about, I mean, even the seeing of signs. And on behalf of all therapists, I just want to apologize that you weren't met in that. And I think it happens so frequently that people start to become the good client instead of just, look, I'm going to show up and be raw and be who I am. And it's like I'm hyper fixed on your expression. Was that okay? Should I have said that? Shouldn't I have said that? And you could have been met differently in that, because I heard in your sharing of it, like, oh my gosh, this thing happened. This is so wild. And to not have someone meet, like, I was like, yeah, that's so wild.
Right.
And that's not really outside of the realm of being a therapist. So it's just like, wow, she could have met you in that.
Yeah, Rebecca, thanks. And I want to give a lot of grace to like understanding a lot comes to people's training. It's fairly recent that training is starting to allow like the idea of continued bonds, whereas it wasn't really before. And it was a different
Right.
therapist who did normalize it. And then like in within the kids club widowed mom group,
Yes.
I'm still very grateful for that, for the time I spend in therapy. But that feeling of noticing what happens when that little budding exploration gets shut down,
Hmm.
it's such a strong signifier of right and wrong. And like, and so yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. To notice in yourself, you were kind of like, oh, I see me tucking this away.
Your secretary or something, right? Like the file.
Yeah.
Reminds me of the movies Inside Out, where they're just like, yeah, like,
Oh
don't, okay, we're not doing that again. What was that look? That we are hyper vigilant in that way. But um, I really appreciated you also adding those elements that were the more reaching from the other side sort of elements, and how that therapist opened up in that group that, hey, how many people had lights go out?
Yeah.
That was so great. Such a beautiful invitation in that way, that parallels the sort of the secrets we hold. That even the secrets that aren't necessarily like shameful, is everyone going to think I'm weird? So I'm not going to.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. And that's why I appreciate your podcast and spaces like this so much, because of everything, like all of the kind of horrible secrets and stuff, the hardest things for me to write and the hardest things for me to stand
Hmm.
up and say is this part of it. I know you're not supposed to read your reviews on Goodreads, but I had to, so I did. And when when people are saying like calling me flaky or
Hmm.
saying, and it's just a bunch of new age woo, and it's like that's the part that really like gets me more than anything, because well, to a couple of reasons. They're putting, their opinion up against a lived experience.
Yeah.
So there's just just a thing where
Right.
it's like, were you there? No, but I was. So
Exactly.
like that portion of it, but also because that there's something in the culture that just wants to silence this, or
Yeah.
like to stop these connections from happening. And so it's, yeah, there, it's insidious in a way. And yeah, so
Hmm.
I love being able to say it, but this is the part that makes me shake
Mm.
in my boots, that people are gonna yeah, dismiss me for being.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you really start looking at the historical roots of shutting down our connections to things that are otherworldly, it's pretty sinister.
Yeah.
It absolutely is, and
And it
terrifying.
cost us a lot to
Yes.
only be in the rational minds and not be in understanding that there's so much more.
Yes, it costs the planet, it's
Yeah,
so expensive, and it's just like, yeah, and so I think that things wanna come back into balance, and yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. So I appreciate you putting it in the book for that reason too. And yeah, just keep illuminating it.
Yeah, I love that too. And throughout the book, and we find this out in the epilogue, it's not like you go into this experience having been a particularly like spiritual person. So it was like through the uncovering and the questioning and the curiosity. And I love the conversation because I think so many of us have had this conversation with our loved one. Like, what do you think happens when we go? You know, like my husband's like, we turn into dust. And I'm like, well, that's boring. So if I go, I will be haunting you, just so you know. And so, you know, there was like this little spark of that conversation that you and Sean had. And then these moments where you're just like, I don't know any other way to explain this than this other realm that I just was not tuned into before.
Yes, yes, and that how my grief experience allowed me to maybe become more receptive to it, and then the whole yeah, and just I could also say, like, what a powerful being Sean was, and
Mm,
that he had
Mm,
some magic to him in life.
right.
mm-hmm.
There's something to all of that, and the fact that that I was fairly skeptical, and I remain kind of skeptical. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not
Mm-hmm.
just super credulous, even though I want to stay open and I want to keep checking, you know, like to check with other people, check to, and just, yeah. And that's the other thing. When people call me a flake, why I get so bothered by it is because I think they misunderstand the rigor with which I tried to make sense of everything and all of the scientific lectures that I attended. And all like, there's
Mm-hmm.
just so many directions to look. And when you start to bring all the pieces together, science and spirituality are one and the
Yes.
same. And it's
Ah,
just, it's so mysterious and beautiful and big. And,
yeah,
you know, and yeah, it's a real joy and honor to be able to ask these questions together. And so that, I think
yeah.
that's one of the big gifts of
Absolutely.
grief.
Oh, I love that. One of the big gifts of grief. I know that resonates with me as well. I always think of Rebecca as just like a like spiritual being from birth, like, you know, just like always tuned in.
Wrong.
I know I'm probably wrong. But I think for me, it was like there were these moments of kind of feeling like things were bigger. And I, you know, my professional career was in the sciences. You know, my PhD is in social science and I worked with, you know, rigorous scientists. And I always wondered that. I was like, but isn't the biggest question, isn't that what's so intriguing about the idea of creator or universe or something is that there are these little data points and we can't figure it out yet. Like to me, that was like the biggest, most intriguing mystery versus like shutting it down because there wasn't information yet. I was like, huh, to me, that feels like the most exciting thing to
Yeah,
tackle.
I know. That funny thing is calling it like the consciousness problem and then just putting it aside.
Yeah.
Or
Yes.
the joke about like, give us one free miracle and we'll explain the rest. Like that, like every branch of
But
science.
then it's like,
Love
but not
it.
that miracle. But not
Yeah.
that miracle. It needs to be a different one, you know, which is just, yeah, that's so funny.
So, Jessica, you were writing this book for 7 years, or when did you start? Like after his death, when did you kind of know, oh, I'm writing a book?
So I went to Camp Widow. So it's a conference for widowed people. And there was a session on writing through grief, and I signed up for that. And so I started doing some journaling after that. And then I took a really important and influential writing course where I met a bunch of people all around the world, and we kind of stayed in touch online through a Facebook group. I think I started in earnest writing this book in 2017, and it's coming out in 2024. So, yes.
Yeah. So that was probably less than 2 years after.
Yeah, and I'd always had been someone who would like write in a journal to get my feelings out. So I
Yes.
started writing immediately, and then when I started kind of trying to learn the craft of writing, because
Mm.
you can't publish, no one wants to read your journal. Like it's just, no, and please, I don't want anyone to read my journal.
No,
So,
Right.
right. Yeah. Well, and I remember, I think it might have been Elizabeth Lesser, but someone saying, write from the scar, not the wound, or so,
yeah,
Mm.
and I
yeah,
feel like I think you can do a lot of writing in the wound and it's important so that you have something to
Sure.
mine the emotion that was happening in the moment. But there's, you want to take readers, I think, to like, I'm okay.
Yeah.
And sort of from the scar place, okay, now this is how I integrated this. So you don't have to do the work of integrating versus I'm writing straight up trauma. Good luck with it.
So that was one of the course that I mentioned was taught by Martha Beck and Elizabeth Gilbert, who had both written memoirs that I had read early on that were just so transformative and instructive. But the process that we learned in that class was that there's an inhale and an exhale. And so the inhale is that like writing from the wound. And then you dive into that and find like what's the treasure and how can I polish this up? And then the exhale is what you give to share to the next person who comes along that has that wound. And so that's how that conversion process from inhale to exhale is, I think it's transformative for the writer. And then it gives something that's processed and doesn't just spread pain.
Exactly.
Which sometimes that really traumatized writing can do. Yeah.
Sure. Another thing that I wanted to touch on, and I had such a different lens reading it because we recently interviewed an author, Warren Kozak, who's a widower, and talked about sort of society's perception of widowers and how they are seen as this like everyone rallies around them and wants them to get, newly paired up and how will this man cook for himself? There is just this outpouring of this sort of floundering male. And then there is a very different perception. He was noting it in his book, sort of like through movie, but widows are not portrayed in the same way. And we sort of went on that journey with you. And you had this moment where you were like, oh, I'm a threat. You use that language, like I'm seen as a threat, as the single one in a group of paired off humans who are used to you being paired off as well. And now you're this single woman sort of floating around this. So I just wondered if you could talk about that experience and that shift from the rallying around to a different perception of you.
Yeah, that was really hard. And I think when you go through grief, people talk about secondary losses and, that sometimes your friendships aren't always what you think and the people who are there for you aren't who you always think. And so my mom had tipped me off that my friends would start seeing me as a threat after 6 months because when she was widowed, that had happened to her. But my mom is older than me. I was 44 when I was widowed. And so I just assumed that this was something in her bridge club or like just a very
generational thing, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, that wouldn't happen with me. But there was just someone who made an offhand comment. It was meant to be a joke, but it did show me that that person did perceive me as a threat. And then I put that together with my mom's comment, and it really rocked my world and made me realize, oh my goodness, this is not a joke. and so it kind of inspired me to start dating sooner because I'm like, well, I can neutralize the threat if I'm paired off. But it was too soon in the eyes of society for me to be like really dating, especially because not everyone knew about the problems with my marriage that had come to light. And so dating again was a really tricky thing because I felt fully on board with the idea and just wanting to know if I could and wanting and I had felt with the betrayal so rejected and so unappealing. Do you know what I mean? It was devastating. And so just I think kind of at a like I just wanted to know, like, would someone want me? Do you know what I mean? Like, could anyone think that I was beautiful or desirable? And I had to answer that question for myself.
Yeah.
Because believe me, all my friends' husbands, I was not after any of them. And I wasn't getting those vibes from them either. Like, it wasn't like I was going around flirting with them to get that. So anyway, that is something that I would really like to say publicly for anyone who's listening. You can date when you want. You don't have to wait a year or some prescribed amount of time. That's one of the other big gaps on the widower versus widow thing too, right? It's like, and be secretive about it if you have to. You don't have to tell anyone, but do what feels right to you if you want to, because you deserve to have connection and love and, all of that.
Yeah.
Right. We often do kind of a PSA piece on here to inform people how to support people who are grieving. And it also feels like, can we stop being so hard on each other and making these judgments and prescriptions and what should people do and who's a threat and who's not a threat, and just like relate to the human before us and understand that life is complex and we're all doing our best.
For sure.
Just give some grace.
Absolutely. sort of in that judgment place too, there was another moment, maybe in Camp Widow was the moment where you had this realization. I think that's it, but where there was like a hierarchy of death, right?
Mm.
Where it was like people had more sympathy and empathy for those who it was an accidental, accident like car wreck accident, not accident like accidental overdose, right? So there was this sort of like whether or not it was their own fault or not mattered in how the world reached out to you. And that was so profound, just in that, like, I think we want to believe that we don't behave that way. But probably all of us have some version of that in our head that if we don't look at it, if we don't shine a light on it, we will act out of that place and
Yeah,
just
yeah.
be kind of
It's really
shitty.
hard,
Mm.
especially because my father had a lifelong battle with alcoholism and died of an alcohol overdose, and so
Yeah.
the difference between how his death was met, and the thing is too with
Yeah.
people with addiction, like it's fracturing of relationships, right? And so it's like there, and then there's so much else that goes on around that, and I think people don't like
Hmm.
when my dad died, people didn't know him, and they were like, well, like think that I wouldn't be sad about it because I didn't grow up with him for the latter half of my childhood, right? And but it's
Mm.
like, no, like people
Right.
people who have with an estranged relationship, they probably need even more support because everything that they wish could have been, it all now comes to the reality that it never was,
Yeah.
and that it might not be. But for me now, with the
Mm.
way I hold it, I'm like, maybe not never,
Yeah.
because as I opened up, and I don't write about this at all in the book, but like as I came to some of the grief work that I was doing, it helped me get into a better relationship with my dad,
Mm.
with a pregnancy loss that had
Yeah.
happened, which I do write about that part, but it's
Hmm.
just like all of my unresolved relationships with people who
Yeah.
had died came into a better place because I was more open to that. And so,
Yeah, it's beautiful because you wrote just a small snippet of that, but it made my dad died when I was 30. So it's been almost 20 years. And we had an estranged relationship. The moment of his death, I was a small child grieving. Like it was that animalistic, primal. And it was that little girl that lost her dad so long ago, but he was still in the living world. But then what I realized in reading that part in your book was like, oh, there's still a piece that I haven't quite looked at, which is reconciling the fullness of who he was and having relationship with him and his death, in him not being here. And so it just goes to show the power of even just like, oh, let me just include this small piece. I was like, oh, I have this
wow.
big piece of work to do because
Yeah, yeah, no,
that's real. Yeah.
that's amazing to hear that reflected about what opened up for you. And also, whenever I find more work to do, I'm like, why?
Right.
I know.
So sorry for that
Thank
part.
you for your
Yeah.
empathy and sympathy for that. No, I know. I was just saying yesterday, being a self reflective human is really hard
It's such
work.
a
Don't recommend it.
it's such a but I think the other thing about that sort of hierarchy and denial is because of that, then we go back to those family secrets, right? I have a cousin who passed away in the fall who had severe, severe addiction issues, severe alcohol, drugs, all of it. And we don't know the cause of death. And as I was like feeling your anxiety a little bit about finding out the autopsy report for Sean, because it has real consequences financially in the world, just like
Oh,
my cousins
sure.
did for his children. There's this desire of like, please just don't let it be that. Like, just please don't let it be that. Even though in my cousin's situation, even though autopsy wise it wasn't that, so many choices within his addiction led to that moment. Just like I think you had this realization with Sean. And so it's like in taking the more acceptable answer, we're denying the reality and not allowing the fullness of that person to be grieved because we're trying to pretend that that person was just sort of one aspect of themselves. I don't know. So it just was bringing me back to our conversation about secrets and shame.
Yeah. Well, and it also, like, for a long time, like, it was so hard for me because people, when they hear this, especially when someone died young, they'll be like, how did they die? Like, they ask that. And then
Mm.
I used to lie about it sometimes
Sure.
or just evade the question. But now I answer it honestly. But I felt forced into that weird thing because I didn't
Hmm.
want their judgment to come on. Do you know, like, and I
Yeah.
knew if I said
Yes.
he died of alcoholism, like that isn't a legitimate, as I'm projecting onto them, their mind, like a way. And so it just,
Yeah.
that ends up being like an outsized piece of the unresolved relationship that I have to like carry around for until I guess until I get through the shame of
Mhm.
it. But I just,
Yeah.
yeah, there are so many people who are met with stigma and judgment when they should be met with empathy and compassion. And I wish that that would change. Yeah.
Yeah, I felt that reflection in there, and I felt like your journey led us as readers to a place of deeper compassion for whatever those dark parts of any human are, and a full embrace of what it means to love someone and to commit to someone on that level. I think it just offered us that reflection for ourselves. So I'm so grateful for that.
I think that going back to sort of the coincidences that are not coincidences, or the things that happen that feel like Sean reaching, my jaw dropped on the Bangkok to Calgary. I know that song. I love that song. But when I was reading it, I was like, what? Why are those words in that song? Like, that was
And on her
wild.
wall.
I
I know.
know.
That was so wild. It's so wild and so specific. Like, I wish I could
Yeah.
just take you on a little
A
tour to
journey of,
actually,
of
I
your
should
wall.
have the wall, just to show that.
Wow.
And
And
so
you're right. Like, who writes about Calgary? It was so perfect.
I know. And just for you, just so that you, because you might not know this, Calgary and Denver are actually sister cities. And they're
Oh.
very similar. They're similar because they have the backdrop of the Rocky Mountains. They're
Mm.
similar in terms of, like you were saying, it's a beautiful cloudless day. And then the sky opens up and thunder, and then it
Yeah.
starts snowing. And so it's just like there's like the weather. And so they're very similar. So people know Denver, they can sort of visualize what Calgary is. But yes, people mostly don't include Calgary in their songs because it's not a well-known place. It also doesn't rhyme with that much.
It doesn't rhyme with much. Bangkok
So,
either.
yeah, I
Yes.
know. That's probably the first mention in a song as well.
I did love that connection being in Denver. I was like so surprised. I wasn't anticipating that. And so I'm reading and I was like, oh my goodness, they're in this district. Oh, I know the river that they're talking about.
Yeah.
There was this other element too, and this realization that you shared, which was on the social restructuring or the secondary losses, which is I know when my friends are inviting me to dinner, they're inviting
Mm.
the you pre-Sean's death.
Yeah. The person that I was before Sean died.
Yeah.
And then I didn't know how to conjure that person to show up at their party. And
Of
so I
course.
felt, in a lot of ways, I think I chose to isolate myself more than I needed to be isolated. But at the same time, it was a complete identity shift. I think anything
Mhm.
with a death, but then with a betrayal, all of it, there was just
Totally.
I was just so much in a cocoon. And
Mhm.
I've heard from a couple wisdom teachers and physicians that the people who recover from an enormously traumatic event are the ones who are willing to allow their identity to change, and the people
Mhm.
who cling to their old identity are the ones who don't. And so when I
Mhm.
feel some sadness and compassion, it's like you probably could have gone for dinner and they would have been fine with you showing up how you are,
Yeah.
right? And versus saying I can't because I'm not her. But also I'm kind of proud that I had the instinct to like honor the process. That I understand that I was going through a transformation that would take some time, and it was probably best to just like lay low
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
figure out who
Yeah.
who I am now.
I think of it like you don't know if the person can hold it or not. And are you in a place to be okay with them not holding it? So sometimes when we're fragile, there's just a wisdom that says, I can't do this right now. Even if they could be great, I'm not taking my chances that someone's going to want me to show up as pre Sean's death. I'm not in the place to do that or to be
Yeah.
with that.
Thank you for saying that because that's exactly right. And I remember now, like in that time, that I could actually feel
Mm,
myself hitting a wall. Do you know what I mean? Where it's like I can do it and I can be okay with it until, and then, but the wall, I don't know when that moment's coming.
exactly.
How much time do I have? 15
Right.
minutes, an hour? And then it would be like, I have to go. Do you know what I mean? It's
I know.
like I've hit, and it was like, or people coming to visit. I'm like, thank you for coming.
Get
Please
out.
get out. Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think so many of us have had even that moment of recognizing within ourselves that we are just not the same person, and then navigating those new relationships. I was just on the phone with a friend yesterday talking about how we were both professionally scholars and academics and all these things, and we both had our own journey in life that has led us to a life embracing sort of the multitudes of planes.
Soulful.
Soulful, definitely more soulful. And how we still come into these moments of people being like, "Who are you?" Or understanding, like, "Oh, this person can only hold this much of my new self." And that's a hard thing to realize. And you have to decide for yourself, do I want to not be my full self and still keep this relationship? Or do I want to pour myself into relationships where I can show up as this self that I am right now? It's so difficult.
Yeah, I really get that. And a part of me thinks like that all relational problems are because our software is not up to date with
Yes.
someone.
I
And
love
it's, if we could go through some kind of bonding or transforming thing, or even just like whatever the thing is that softens us, like
Mm,
with the check-in that you guys always do, it's,
mm.
I think there's something where you come in. Do
Yeah.
you know what I mean? We'll check in with each other's hearts, and then we're like, okay, we are current,
Yeah.
something can happen. And so with those friends, I don't think it's possible with everyone, but I do think there was some
Mhm.
practice of doing that with everyone you came into contact with.
I'm thinking like when you're on your phone and you go to an app and it's like, you need to update this app. And you're like, okay, let's
Yes.
just hit update.
So I just like, I don't get doing it with your
Yeah.
parents. It's like, I'm an adult now. Update. Like,
Update.
Update
as
your
we're playing.
software.
Like, yeah.
Yeah. There are a couple more things. I know we're pushing against our time together, but there are a couple more things. And this may be just more of a reflection. And we talked about it briefly earlier, but I am part of a very close knit family that sort of spans, brothers and sisters and cousins. And my husband is very much part of our family. And in reading your book and your relationship with the Waites, there was something so beautiful about that relationship with his family and the ways that they showed up and all the realness of it, right? There were also moments where it was really difficult all the way through to now, I'm sure, with the publishing of the book. But there was something so beautiful about that social network and that familial network. And I just wanted to hear from you, like, how that has been in the complexity of this loss.
Yeah, I really love Sean's family, and they are individually and collectively wonderful people. And part of the relationship is like Sean's family all lives in Calgary. That's how I ended up. We were here, and
Yeah.
so I spent all the holidays with them and all of that. And I realized kind of early on, oh, my link to them might be gone unless I
Yeah.
want to
Mhm.
invest time and keep these relationships going. Maybe they will be lost, and I didn't want that. And like we were so close that one of the brothers actually said, "Why don't we get like a house together or a side by side duplex or something like that, where we can kind of join
Yeah.
our families together so that we don't."
Mm.
Which is just like so beautiful and amazing.
Yes.
And I ended up realizing that that was probably not the best thing to do in the long term for me. But
Mhm.
I love them and they love me. And even though this publication is hard, and they might not be able to come to the book launch or that sort of thing, I
Mhm.
think once the storm of publication and attention exposure has passed, we will still love each other. Yeah.
That's beautiful. I thought a lot of my mom as well because she lost that link. And every time one of my aunts, one of my dad's sisters reaches out to her or one of my dad's cousins, I just feel this immense gratitude because they are just demonstrating that it wasn't just about my dad, that it was also about her as a
Mhm.
human. And I felt that so much in your writing that Sean was the link, but that you had developed these really beautiful relationships with that family and that it was both ways that it would be maintained. And so it was just such a beautiful offering. So thank you.
I sort of meant to ask this question on the front end or to bring this up in the front end because it's in the beginning of the book and it feels like a big emotion to bring in towards the end of recording, but I'm just going to go for it. The thing that really was so heart-wrenching, I still think about it and I just want to just collapse in tears, is the moment that you have to tell Dash and the feeling of before I tell him his dad is still alive, like that he's still living in a world where his dad's alive and that you have to make a decision how to do that. And uh, it just felt relatable, even though I've never been in that situation. There was something so human. It's like, okay, I'm an adult and I'm dealing with my world falling apart, but now I have to go.
Be the destroyer. That that's what it
Yes.
felt like, and I it's
Yes.
funny because in the book I say, and the editor questioned me about this, "Was this really
Mm.
your feeling?" And I'm like, "It absolutely was." That as I was
Hmm.
waiting for his bus to come, that I felt like a predator
Wow.
lurking, waiting to do this horrible thing.
Oh,
So it
Oh,
was just the most awful feeling as I was waiting for him to come. But somehow, even in that, like as I look back, there was some grace in an idea that I had to take him to a place we never
that you
go.
never went. That was so
So that
brilliant.
when I was over, we could come home and home would still be safe. Like, so
Yes.
I don't know why that occurred to me, but it did. And so, I'm grateful for that. Like, even in how awful it was, that
hmm,
I just followed some instinct. And yeah, no, it's hard. And in the end, and kind of like to circle back to where we started, like my son Dash, he's doing great now.
Yeah.
Like the pandemic was hard, like the whole, like all of the things, and
yeah,
like loss and grief and lockdowns and all of that. But we can grow through these things, and yeah, I'm so proud of like what a sensitive, empathetic, kind human being he is, and
Yeah.
that he's has the courage to take on this big adventure
Yeah.
where he's going to ride his bike from Banff
Uh-huh.
to New Mexico, like
Oh
that.
my gosh.
Yeah, yeah, he'll go pedaling right past you,
oh,
probably. Yeah, it's just, we can survive and thrive through all
yeah.
of this adversity. And yeah.
Well, and I actually feel this feels really important to me. The moment that you said, I don't remember exactly how you said it, so say it in whatever words now, but you said something about people will say, "Oh, kids are resilient," and it's actually not that they're resilient. And yeah, what was the distinction? Because it was important.
In my mind, resilience means let you bounce back to what you were before. Do you know what I mean? And so and I'm like, we're not resilient. We're formed. We're formed by our experiences, and we grow around the giant boulder like a tree. That's
Yes.
how I wrote it, because that's how I see it. And so I see him as being shaped by this experience, not resilient to whatever he would have been, and the person that he would have been if his dad had lived. It would have been very different.
Right. But it speaks to the attunement that you have as a mother because I think so often I watch it with divorce, I watch it with death. People say, "Oh, kids are resilient. They're fine." And it's like, "No, they're not fine. They shut down because you didn't hold them in that experience and help them grow into the new version of them." They can feel the expectation of the adults like, "Please just be okay and be the person you were before."
Mm.
So
Yeah.
I could feel how you were just like, I recognize this is happening for him too. And even when he says okay, or he says, yeah, school is fine. Yeah,
Yeah, for sure. And
we saw a heart. Yeah.
Right. Right.
yeah, no, and then I'm waiting for his book to come out where he talks about like all the ways that I was like the Eye of Sauron looking at him. Are you
Right,
okay? Are
right.
you? Yeah. I'm sure that I did that, and I'm sure he felt it and was like, "Holy cow!"
Well, maybe he'll write maybe it'll be an album, right? Maybe it'll be an album that he writes. He's a musician.
Yeah, and he's a musician, so he can put it to songs, and then
Might get written on this bike trip.
yeah, he's a good songwriter.
Beautiful.
Well, we're at time.
I'd love to maybe yeah, I'd love to learn more about the writing with prisoners work.
Hmm.
I'd love to learn more just maybe specifically about how writing it's something that keeps coming up, but we haven't exactly talked about is just the power of writing to help you move through grief. So I think
Yes,
there's like,
yes.
as you're doing the rounds, if you ever are like, I want to go back and talk about grief, come
Thank
back.
you. I would love to come back. Yeah, you have an amazing show. Yeah.
So we could totally have you back on to talk more about the work you're doing in the world.
Writing is definitely a
Yes.
technology of healing, and so it's I can it's free and available.
Yeah, beautiful. All right. So we always end an episode kind of checking out, asking about how we've been touching into our grief this week. So I'll give everybody just a moment. I'll ask Rebecca first, and then I'll ask you, Jess, and then I can close. So Rebecca, how have you been touching into your grief this week?
Well, I think most obviously reading the book, but what actually was happening for me in conjunction with that. So I've mentioned before, my nephew, Ethan, was stillborn, and the spirit animal that my sister always feels really connected to with him is dragonflies. And I just have this one dragonfly who's been visiting me all week.
Oh.
And I feel so connected to him again. And he would be 17 now. I mean, so it's really been sweet. And I've just been feeling like, the part of me that like we were talking about, the questioning part that's like, I mean, is it dragonfly season? It's like, I just can't, that part isn't even coming to the table. It's like, I'll sit back right now.
Yes.
You're right. Be with this dragonfly, be with Ethan.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Yeah. Thank you for sharing, and what a good nephew. Jess, how have you been touching in with your grief?
Yeah, for me this week, as I'm getting ready to help send Dash off on his big trip, I'm really feeling, I guess it's the grief that comes with the software update that we were talking about. Like, he's really going, he's really getting, and he's really, ready. Yeah, and as much as I have the urge to do all the Shakespeare, like, neither a borrower nor a lender be, like, I'll give him all. It's like, no, he already knows. And just so it's a kind of grief with coming to now, and getting ready to kiss him goodbye on his big adventure. Yeah.
Oh, that's so beautiful. My twins are 6, and I feel like there's such an untalked about, like, all these griefs that happen as you're raising children, of like everything that you want, which is independence and all these things, and just this like, these are my only, I will not have any more. And so there's this just tender grief that is just cycling through all the time. So I'm so grateful for you sharing that. And yeah, what an adventure. How bold. I love it.
How about you, Andrea?
Yeah, I've been touching into my grief. Mine has really been around signs. And so, what a beautiful sign to have gotten this book and be able to read it and have this sort of affirmation and just little things and opening my heart. And I think the science part of my brain kept categorizing it, like when I tell people, like, this is going to sound really crazy. And I've been working really hard to let that go, of giving that power anywhere, even within myself, that these signs are made up or anything. And I was remembering this Netflix documentary. It's like a docuseries called Surviving Death. And in one of them, it's all about signs. And at some point, somebody sort of asked the question, like, and so what? So much in our world is made up. Money is made up, so much in our world is made up. And we choose to believe in that sign. Like, we choose to believe in the sign of the $10 bill being worth something that I will exchange for that object. And so why not? Why not believe in these signs that I'm getting as being more information for me and the world? And so it was so beautiful. It was just such a beautiful moment to get this, to be caught in a thunderstorm yesterday, that I just am feeling like a big, big heart opening. And I'm so grateful that you've been part of it, Jessica. I wish this book so much success for all the reflection and healing that it can bring to so many people. I have literally already recommended it, so you should have some additional pre-orders, because I have already told people, like, get this. There's so much wisdom in here for all of us. So this is the week of your launch, and I hope all of our listeners get their copy, and we can't wait to hear what you think about it. But thank you so much for joining us, Jessica.
Andrea, Rebecca, thank you so much. It's just been such a joy.
Oh, thank you.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of All the Grief. You can find us on Instagram at All the Grief Pod. And please take a moment to rate our podcast and share us with your friends. We'd love to keep expanding our reach to all the people who could benefit from conversations on grief. Take care.